Hello.
Hi.
Hi,
So
Eric. Hi, Akash.
Hi, everyone.
So Eric is off till April 20th. Is that it?
yeah, our son was born last last week sometime. It's, yeah. So I'm still taking some breaks to write stuff, but I'm not doing my normal day job stuff.
Cool. That's good news. So the other thing that I wanted to probably bring up with that was we'll probably slow down a little bit in terms of kind of like figuring out where and how we integrate. And given that Eric, once you're probably back, we probably have to kind of like ramp up. But from the Azure side, one of the things that maybe I can share is that we're going to look at integrating this with Azure policy, and Shuei, who's on the Notary project, is going to help kind of like talk to the Azure Community Service and find out what the integration points are. But that would be all on the Azure side. It won't affect the Ratify project itself. If there are asks, we'll make it kind of like figure out what implementations need to get added, and maybe even figure out the provider model and whatnot over time. So that's the other side of things that can happen. So for today's call, Susan, what did you have in mind? How did you want to progress?
We have a list of unmerged PRs. I just want to go through them and kind of see what are the pending action items. And then we have a few items that we've added to the agenda. They're not like big agendas, but like follow-up items that Eric said he was going to look at the CRDs. But of course, congratulations, Eric. If you have an update for the CRD, we're happy to hear it. But if you are busy with other more important things, we'll see you when you come back.
Cool. Yeah, when we get to that, I have some stuff I can talk about that I've been thinking about, but I don't have my proof of concept ready yet. I got hung up.
Yeah, hope you've been getting some sleep at least. It's pretty hard first month.
The first month, 2 under 2 it's a new game, that's for sure.
Okay, let me share my screen. Okay, can everybody see my screen?
Yep.
Cool. So I've just made a list of PRs, and some of them have been open for a while. I think I've missed one, which is the fix of the local cache, but I think Akash, you've made some commits to it. Maybe you can talk about it as well. The first one is Azure Workload Identity Provider. Akash, are you waiting on a sign off from Teja?
Yeah, so I was able to make quite a bit of changes for that PR. So now actually, for the most part, it's not timing out anymore because I was able to front load some of the authentication round trip and cache the AD token. So with those changes, now we're seeing a huge improvement with the timeout issue when working with AKS. So I think overall it's good to go. Susan, thanks for your feedback. And I think it's pretty much ready to go. Just waiting for Teja to give her sign off as well. So
after we merge this PR, do we plan to add like some sample related to the scenario? Like how to set up?
Yep. So I'm actually right now writing like a little bit of a user scenario doc, so it's easy for the user to kind of add workload identity to your current AKS cluster, and then whatever config changes they need to make in Ratify to use that, because it's a little bit involved currently. So
Sajay have hands up.
Are you okay merging this right now? Because this has been open for quite some time, and because we've gone through a couple of iterations, and if that's reasonable, then we can follow up as a any feedback items or PRs going forward. Is that okay?
Yep, I'm totally fine with that.
Do you want me to hit the merge button?
Yeah, go ahead. Let's do that.
Okay, it's not in files. Conversation.
Just want to squash merge at the bottom, I guess.
Oh,
Yeah.
sorry, I'm not signed in.
So the merge policy is like if something's open for a day, then, or I don't know if you still want to stick to a day, but like, you know, if something's open for a couple days, already got a round of feedback and all the feedback's been addressed, it's probably safe to merge.
Sounds good. I will merge this after this meeting, once I can remember my Git credential in this profile. The next item we have, I know, Akash, you have the K8 secret authentication provider ready for review.
Yep, so whenever you guys have a little bit of time to go over it, we can, I think it's in a pretty good state. Last week, we were kind of discussing how the permissions would be set up in the cluster to actually give Ratify the ability to read the secrets. So that's a little bit independent of the actual implementation, because at the implementation level, we just need to basically use the V1 API to pull the secrets and then resolve those and then grab the corresponding credentials. So it could be treated independent of that. But currently the way that it's set up and the recommended way is that we would use a cluster role, which would have read permissions for secrets, and then we would have an individual role binding to actually bind that cluster role to the service account associated with Ratify. Yeah.
Any feedback there on the implementation?
And I think once you have it reviewed, like Eric said, keep the PR open for a couple of days, and then if there's no updates and if it's approved, we can merge it in. So if Susan, if you have time, or Nathan, if you can take a look, or Teja, who's online. Thanks for joining, Teja, by the way.
Yeah, so sorry, last week I was out of town. So this week I'll catch up on things. Yeah.
So we were considering the workload identity before you joined. Are you okay if we merge it and then kind of like open any additional items as issues on top of that?
I had some bigger comments. There was some custom code for all ACR authentication and those things, which I felt could be simplified. I don't know whether they have been addressed or not yet.
Yes, actually, thanks for your feedback, Teja. I was able to switch over to use the MSAL Go SDK. Sorry, the SDK that you had linked. So I basically removed all of that custom.
Okay.
So
I'll take a look and get back to you. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
After the Azure workload provider and the Kubernetes secret, are there any additional providers that we need to implement in the short term?
I don't know much about the EKS provider. If it's a special provider, and we can think about it, but I would kind of like leave it to once when maybe Eric is back, or depending on Akash's workload as well.
Yeah, I see Jimmy on the call. Jimmy, is there a special provider for EKS, or would the Kubernetes like image pool secret work for the EKS scenario too?
So no, the ECR doesn't support pool secrets. So you're going to have to use a provider. There's I'm not sure if this is the right thing that we're talking about, but there's an example out there. in let's see, Ratify docs examples, and it shows how to go out and get the login for ECR and then use it for Docker. Then you can also use it to log in with Oris, with the Oris client. Is that what the provider is going to use?
So
Yeah, go ahead, Eric.
that sample doc that I wrote, I think was, it goes through, how to use the CLI, the AWS CLI to get the credentials for that. But in that guide, that was for just pushing the container to a public ECR. So it doesn't actually cover the in-cluster Ratify scenario for a private ECR. So
does the in-cluster Ratify still use the CLI? So it'd be like bash type commands, or is it going to be using an SDK, or what's the?
Ideally we would use some sort of SDK. I'd probably want to shy away from calling CLIs since that can be brittle. But if there's a mechanism that we can use that's programmatic, and ideally, I mean, I don't know what the recommended approach is. For example, on the Azure side, you can set up your cluster to be able to talk directly to an ACR, so you don't have to declare pull secrets. You can also set up identities that have access that can be used programmatically. So I don't know what the analog on the ECR side is. If you have identities that you create through IAM, if those, I think you were talking about, those can get attached to clusters, to EKS clusters. So if there's a sample that you could link of that.
Yeah. So the way to do it in EKS is to use AWS Identity and Access Management, and then use what we call IRSA, IRSA. It's IAM roles for service accounts.
Okay.
And so essentially what happens is you create the role that you need, with the permissions attached to the role via policies that will give you the access to the ECR that you need, or for that matter, whatever AWS services you need. And then that role itself gets annotated onto a service account that Ratify would then use. Now, the idea here is that will provide the credential chain, but Ratify would have to make the actual call that would assume that role. So that would be an SDK call, I would assume here.
Yeah. So I think from like the like guts of it on the Azure side is we use our Azure flavor of that, and we end up with a token that we can use in ORAS. So we would want to do the same thing using whatever SDK supports that from the AWS side. Okay.
Because the CLI stuff works. I tried that out last week after our meeting, and that works just fine with getting the token to get into the right ECR registry. So I guess we're looking for a Golang SDK setup for this, is what you're looking for.
Yeah, that would be the most ideal. If that doesn't exist, then we can look at how we would use the CLI. We'd have to kind of wrap it with some Go stuff to parse the output, but it could be done.
Okay. Is there an example of you doing this? I mean, is it under like the plugins verifier or something?
On the Azure side, the PR that we were talking about earlier is Akash is the Azure side of that one. Yeah.
Which PR was that?
129. The Azure Workload Identity Auth Provider.
Okay. Okay, I'll take a look at that. And run down, I guess, how we would do this with Golang. So I'm trying to understand how this would fit into the verifier itself. because the verifier I thought itself was a plugin, right? So
there's verifier plugins and there's referrer store plugins, and this fits into the the Aura's referrer store plugin.
Okay.
To be able to authenticate to the registry.
Okay.
So, yeah, the referrer store you use to get whatever you need, and then the verifier is what's actually going to do like validations.
All right.
And I mean, it's ideal if there's a Go SDK, but like really whatever the recommended way of doing like that sort of thing for EKS ECR probably makes the most sense. So it'd be good to know what the recommended approach is if you had some program that wanted to talk to the registry and pull contents. Whatever that recommended approach is would be probably best.
Well, I mean, so if the rest of the thing is written in Go, then ideally we'd want to stay within, the Go binary. And
right. Yep.
So I think using the CLI would be a fallback position that I'm not really interested in doing. So, I mean, I just have to come up with an example. I mean, I see two things here that I can use to run this down, and that is under the referrer store, there's a sample Go, and then also the 129 pull request that I can take a look at as well.
Yep. Yeah, that should give the workload identity one should give a good idea of the scaffolding that we're going to have, and then whatever we need to plug in there for doing the similar approach via AWS.
Eric, do you think we would abstract out parts of the workload identity so that it is provider independent? And we're not at that stage, is what I'm understanding.
Yeah, that's the part that I don't understand either. Is what is the CSP dependencies and how are those called out?
Yeah, we I need to look at the PR again, but yeah, I'll have to look at that again, and I can maybe send a message here. I'll go click it.
Because I see there's a
My understanding is the workload identity at the high level, it is very generic, and I don't know and EKS has support for workload identity through its IAM.
I'm not sure what you mean by workload identity. I mean,
this is the word that we are talking here. Previously, they used to have pod identities. Now they are moving to this federation of Kubernetes RBAC with the whatever is the native Active Directory, Azure Active Directory thing. That is the workload identity, is my understanding. So does EKS or does AWS has that kind of federation model with Kubernetes?
So not that I'm aware of. I mean, the way that we provide identity for workloads at the pod level would be the service accounts. And those service accounts will be annotated with IAM roles so that they assume that role, they're presented a credential chain, but the SDK would trigger that credential chain assumption. So, yeah, that's the way that I assume it's going to work here at this point.
I see.
So I think, at least on my part, I'll probably take some homework to go just go look at the URSA that you mentioned and try to understand how that might relate to what we have here, and make sure that will plug into the provider interface that we have, and then we can probably talk about how that would work when we set up the cluster or assign that.
Okay, yeah, I'll try to get a link to, yeah, there's an old blog that was written in 2019 when we first came out with this, and I'll share it.
Cool.
Where do you want me to share it? In the chat window, or do you want me to put it right into the HackMD document? Or
if you want to put it in I don't know if the messages for the chat are ephemeral, so if you want to put it in the notes section of the HackMD, then we can pick it up.
Okay. And then, so with this approach, you can also use cross account. So the only difference is the workloads themselves have to be able to support a configuration item that tells them to assume a different role, and then it should work with cross account. But right now, this example I just put in there is for like same account registries.
Okay.
Yeah, I see a document where it talks about the workload federation with AWS. I don't know if that, maybe I put it in the chat. They have given steps on AWS, Azure, and all those things.
I mean, this looks like it's federating a. I'm not sure I understand how this is working.
I think it's federating the Kubernetes identity to whatever the cloud provided authentication provider.
All right, well, I'll take a look at it. I mean, the first line there that I'm looking at says security AWS users or roles can use permanent or temporary AWS security credentials to impersonate a service account on Google Cloud. So this kind of, this like it's federating to Google Cloud from AWS, which is not.
Nice. Okay.
What
I think I remember, I don't know, Akash, you have some, that HackMD document where you referred this Kubernetes documentation on the workload identity.
Yes. Yeah, so on the Azure link that I just sent, we have like a diagram also talking about how it actually works with Azure. I'm not familiar with AWS's. I can look into that, but yeah. Here, let me link the HackMD anyway, so it's easier to see. Yeah.
I remember you have some links to that.
Yeah. And if anything, it'll give a higher level overview of how the federated identity works. So.
Akash, are you looking for the document right now?
I just pasted it on the chat.
So the way that this looks is workload identity is what we do with Ursa, is the way that I see this working. But I'll have to look at it a little closer.
Yeah, as long as the managed identity support is there and with their instance metadata service is there, I think it's pretty generic concept. But I don't know what's that need? Is there any support needed from AWS that I don't?
I mean, essentially, what we do when we set a cluster up to allow the pods within the cluster to use the Ursa functionality is we set up a cluster specific OIDC provider, an IDP, and then that is part of assuming the role, and that's where the identity comes from. So yeah, I'll run with this after the meeting or sometime this week.
Yeah, sounds good. We'll do some rating and then we can bring this up again in maybe when Eric comes back. The next PR I have on the list is some dependency bot PRs. I was just wondering, what is the process that we're taking with these automatic generated PRs? So it looks like it triggers a build and it valid, like if it has a tick, then the build is successful. There's another similar PR where the build failed. So in the case of build successful, are there additional tests that we should run before we merge the auto update?
I would probably say, depending on the dependency and the bump, it might matter. Like Docker distribution's kind of a big one for us. So it would probably be worth running through like I think we have like one smoke test scenario that's like, deploy, ratify, essentially do the quick start. And if the quick start works, it likely didn't break anything, but I don't think we have like a vast suite of CI tests that will run and catch issues with this. So yeah, that would probably be my take, is just at least running through the quick start and make sure that doesn't break the fundamental scenario that we have. As far as like who should do that, I guess I don't know if I have a good answer.
I see. What is the
I'm happy
advantage of always running the latest version? Like how often does these PRs come up?
I think they come up just when there's non-major bumps. I think Dependabot will do. So like anything less than, like if this jumped to 3, I don't think Dependabot would do it. But if it's less than that, I think it will auto trigger a PR. And the benefit would be if there is like a CVE associated with any of these dependencies, this kind of helps bump you along so that you don't just have your Go mod from 6 years ago after you worked on a project for a while. So
I would recommend we merge these in, because one is a CV from Sixtor. I'm aware of the CV.
Okay.
That one seems reasonable. I can merge that in. Distribution, I've been on chat with Milosh, who's the maintainer for distribution. These are mostly security bug fixes as well. So it's okay to take these two, is what I'm thinking at this point, because they're both are CVE fixes.
Okay.
So I can merge these two just to kind of avoid any more delays.
Sajay, the cosine one has a build failure.
Yeah, okay. Goodness.
So does that mean like some interface have changed that we need to make a code update?
Well, can you scroll up on this one more time?
Yep.
So let's see, Sigstore. So this adds, Sigstore? Yeah, so this is a major revision. So from V00 whatever to V1. So that might have changed some interface. And then Go container registry is still under 1.0. So they're within their right to make interface changes. So yeah, that one might have changed something that we need to address.
Susan, do you think you can pick this up, the Dependabot change for Sixtor?
Yeah, I will take a look. Maybe it's something very simple like.
Okay, cool.
If you have a question on that, I spent a little time in that cosine module not long ago. So feel free to ping me.
Okay, but theoretically, Wolf, I don't want to take away sleep or time from you.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, I'll work with Nathan. Do you have any knowledge on the cosine library?
No, nothing specific.
Okay, I'll see what I can find.
Yeah, if you get stuck, I can probably. It's probably something quick. They just have their own way of doing things.
Yeah, I can also, are they on GitHub as well? Like I can just ask them if I need to.
Cosine has their own Slack, but most of it, I believe it should be straightforward. The other thing is if you see where you end up, and then we'll kind of like figure out what the communication path will be.
Yeah, sounds good. Okay, so that's the dependent bots. The last PR is a minor item that I had for loading certificates from a directory. And I had a question, like the main strategy is that given that we have an array of path, I walk through the path using the library, and I don't want to read everything in the directory in. So I want to only get the certificate out and parse it in the notary logic. And I'm wondering if there are any constants somewhere in like any library that would define the extensions for the certificate files. Like all in our sample, all our samples ends in CRT. But I wonder like if any of these file formats are also valid for notary.
I think it depends on the contents. So like if it's a PEM formatted certificate, I think that's what we use. So I've seen them with .pem, .cert, CRT, and probably most of the ones you have PEM, CRT, CER. I wouldn't do key because I don't think we need to private key. And then I've seen them without extensions. So that was my only, I would say the first three that you have there are probably safe to start with.
Mm-hmm. So if the file doesn't have extension, do we want to read it or not?
I would say I would personally lean towards yes, because the default path that we give, I think, is our default path just the Ratify directory, or is there a subdirectory that is for certificates?
In our default Ratify configuration?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we do have a subdirectory for certificates.
Because if it was a subdirectory, I would lean towards just taking all of them, since we have a purpose, like a purpose-made directory for certificates. So I would assume the only thing people would put in there would be certificates. And that when we ship the Helm chart, I mean, we're the only ones putting stuff in there, so it should only be certificates. So my vote would just be to glob whatever's in there.
I see. So if we, like, let's say people put in a TXT there, and then when we try to parse it as a certificate, is it okay just to throw an error? Like, I think the logic today would just, if there's any error, we probably just break the loop and return.
Yeah, I would say try to parse any file that's in that directory and consider it a PEM formatted public key. But that would be what I'd go with.
Sounds good. Let's just glob everything because it is a subdirectory, is what my memory is.
Yeah, sounds good. Then I'll take out this if statement. Just take everything. Okay. With the presentation discussion items, Eric said he will be looking into CRDs and provide an update maybe when he comes back. And Jimmy had an item to talk to the Caverno people and show them Ratify. Jimmy, did you get a chance with that item?
So yeah, I shared the information with Jim Bagwadia. He's the CEO of Nirmata, the creators of Caverno. I haven't talked to any of the other maintainers of Caverno, but I know right now he did not give me any additional information. I think they're really heads down right now working on their 6-door cosign implementation. He did ask what I thought about the whole Ratify thing, and I, being a recent newcomer to this, I basically said I like the architecture, the multi-layer with plugins for verifiers. So in the future, we need some kind of different verifications. That seems like a more extensible approach, but that's it. I did not get any additional information from him as to what he thought, but I shared a ton of information with him. So I'll follow up again, but given what they're doing with cosign and six-door cosign right now, I'm not sure they have the bandwidth.
Are those public? It's a public meeting that they have where they talk about that implementation?
I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
Okay. Because
you can, if you go out to the Kubernetes Slack, they have their own channel, right? They have a Caverno channel where you could ask a question there, I think.
Okay. Yeah, I went to their GitHub and I didn't know where they were tracking that, but I was interested to know if they were widening the scope of their external data functionality, or if they're trying to fit the SIG store implementation within the current constraints that they have for external data.
Yeah, and I specifically asked that question in the when I reached out to him. We haven't talked, we just chatted on LinkedIn. So I'll follow up again.
Okay.
I hate to beat him up about it, because I know how busy he is, but I'll follow up and see if he's got any, because I explicitly asked, are you looking at, expanding your external data functionality, and have you looked at how the Gatekeeper external data works? But I didn't get a response. So,
okay.
It's a touchy subject, obviously.
Yeah. Just curious, but no rush. And I can share some of what I've looked at. I don't have my proof of concept, but I can share some of what I've looked at for the CRD stuff. So I did look, I took a look at how Gatekeeper is doing it. There's two options if you want to extend the API server for Kubernetes. You can do CRD or you can do API aggregation. And CRD, if your data model fits nicely in something that can be described via open API schema, then CRD is a lot lower overhead. But if you want to do any sort of fancy validation, then you really can't, or you essentially can't block something when it's being created. And so I was looking at how Gatekeeper does it, and they of course use API aggregation through Kube Builder to field all the requests for their CRDs. And I was leaning that direction. The scenario I'm thinking about specifically is being able to add and remove keys from the notary cache when we want to have somebody set up some new public key that they want to verify against. And one of the scenarios I was thinking about was validating that decodes properly when it is applied. And so if we want to do stuff like that, then we would need to do the API aggregation. So I started looking into being able to use Kube Builder to set up the CRDs that we would want to have. The initial ones that I was thinking about were that public key for notary, and the other one being the registry, being able to define a registry that we would be able to go walk to try to address the other point here, which is that timeout strategy. So hoping to be able to address that via CRD, letting users predefine the registries that they intend to pull from so that we can get out ahead of those requests and have to do less round trips within the admission request. So those are the two that I'm looking at specifically. And yeah, I hope to have more on that in future meeting. But if anyone has any thoughts or preferences as far as either of those approaches, be it the CRD or the API aggregation, feel free to chime in.
Well, it sounds like you have to do both, right? I mean, didn't you say that Gatekeeper is using API aggregation, and then once the CRDs are in place, then they just use the Open API v3 schema to. build out their
Yes.
objects for their-
Yes. Yeah. My understanding from reading the Kubernetes documentation was that that they were two separate approaches, that you could define like API extension objects with both, but that they specifically called out CRD as like you just define a new object and the API server will then know how to store it. And then they called the other part of the table API aggregation. But their documentation talks about defining, the custom objects with both approaches. So,
well, I
yeah.
mean, the Open API v3 schema is really nice in so much as, I mean, you can model, objects that are, let's say, inside the pod spec. You can model a node affinity. You can model a toleration.
Mhm.
If you know how to use the API v3 schema. So I'm on that side of the fence with that. But at the same time, I want to make it as easy as possible to, I guess, update your cluster with the needed API changes. So
Right.
My user experience is my driver, I think, primarily. Well, security first, then user experience.
Right. Yeah, and I think either of those approaches would work. But having a CRD that is backed by that API aggregation would allow us to do some things that would give a better user experience. So I'm leaning that way. The other thing that could potentially get us, I was talking to Akash about, is once you're in that space and you already have that API aggregation, we could technically also register as an admission webhook. So we could potentially run some things as admission webhook without Gatekeeper or Caverno. But that would just be maybe some future experiment. But if we're going down that path, we have that option. But that's what I have for now.
I saw Jimmy smiling when Eric mentioned the admission webhook. Do you have some feedback, Jimmy?
I should go off video, I guess. Let's say I'm all about, I think I said this in a prior meeting, I'm all about controlling operator sprawl in a cluster, so, and that goes for validation services that plug into the validating admission webhook or the mutating admission, webhook. So for me, it's a matter of, it'd be nice to have it in case we need it. But I'd have to see a really, a compelling use case for why we would not use Open Gatekeeper, or for that matter, the fast follower. I think Caverno would be a decent fast follower for integration to what we're building. That's my only concern. I mean, I've been using Open now for about 4 years, and then Open Gatekeeper I kind of started using as well when it first came out. So I'm really happy with those pieces. As a matter of fact, if you look at like the node selector that's out there, a lot of people are not even paying attention to the node selector, and they're using node affinities instead. And then they're using like Gatekeeper to make sure their node affinities are correct. And so there's a lot more, let's say, granularity and flexibility in using tools like OPA or Open Gatekeeper or Caverno. So I'm a big fan of those. I'll just throw that out there right now. That's my bias.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Yeah, I was like, oh yeah, we could do this, but like I definitely think we'll stay in our lane for the foreseeable future.
But if we need an off ramp to somewhere else, then that makes sense. When it comes to architecture, I'm all about pace layering and layers of abstraction, or there's layer of indirection. So yeah, I'm very happy with that type of architecture.
Thanks.
But that being said, Gatekeeper went ahead and this project sort of like the impetus to drive their external data for Gatekeeper, because they didn't have it like 6 months ago. So
I think we had a couple of pushes like from Gatekeeper, which was cosine was one of them. And then we internally kind of like mentioned that unless you make this happen, Ratify cannot get public. So let's make sure you go GA and then we'll follow GA as needed.
Yeah.
So that this is one of the key scenarios that we wanted to go after. But the moment we kind of like hit the 3-second timeout, we realized sitting just behind the external data provider might not be the complete solution. The other thing is Cal from Kubernetes, we kind of spoke to him and we're considering kind of like bundling up, like just as a prototype or a thought experiment of being able to actually verify signatures at the containerd level. And so if you think about it, Ratify is kind of like just a set of libraries that kind of stitch this whole concept together. Can we actually bring it down to as a containerd plugin, which is not Kubernetes, and those environments also going forward? But that is a separately orthogonal conversation and does not involve this discussion right now. But definitely those are the places where we want to go. And like you said, layering is kind of like what we've been thinking about where this might land.
So, I mean, and that's one of the compelling use cases, I think, is if we get into an issue where we're now, basically daisy chaining calls, through Gatekeeper to an external data provider, and we're not within the 3-second window. To me, that's a compelling use case to either get a change from Gatekeeper to make, so that they're more comfortable with a wider window, or we take an off ramp and build our own.
Right. And one of the challenges is that if the etcd configuration is modified post verification per se, you've signed off saying that this image is okay and this digit is okay, etcd is still a point of attack. So it depends on which layer you want to apply it and how comfortable you are. So admission controller might be operator-based verification versus if you kind of go down to containerd as a way to kind of block the execution, it's more like runtime-based validation. So where you want to stand depends on how you want to execute it. So we want to make sure
like a shim level.
Right. And that's another conversation we've had where if you want to validate the signature at an execution or before process create, how do you do that? So different runtimes have different extensibility aspects. And if you're not purely in Kubernetes, you can't say we cannot kind of like leave the non-Kubernetes user out. That's kind of my agenda here.
Okay. I mean, I think that's a very interesting approach. I think I like that idea. It gives us more flexibility. So.
Okay, cool. The last item to discuss is old topic, Gatekeeper Timeout. Akash, do you want to? I think you added this item. Do you want to talk about that?
I think we kind of covered that. Eric and I had a conversation about what would be like the long-term or medium-term solution to this, because we've been kind of scratching our heads about this for a while. How are we going to approach this? So I think what we probably will have to do if you want to stick with Gatekeeper in 3 seconds is we're going to have to build out a registry crawl caching mechanism, which using CRDs. I think Eric, you have a better idea of how it would work, but in any case, it would be pretty extensive in the amount of work that would be required to build that, because you need to maintain cache. You'd have to have cache invalidation, cache updating, all of that logic built into it. And they would have to run kind of like a cron job on the side. So
yeah, and it gets a little more, there's a little more tension there when you start to look at what I'm assuming ACR is doing the same thing, but ECR is looking at pull through caching, and so then you're getting more latency into where when these image information comes available. So yeah, and
with that, like you might pull an image from a registry, and if you have that pull through caching where it actually comes from Docker Hub originally, we might go crawl it, and it might not be there until you actually ask for it to be there.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I like in the short term, the best we can do is the current experience, which is where, the first time while we're getting stuff cached, it might not work. The midterm would be, we start trying to crawl things to preempt those requests. And then the longer term will have to be to see what we can do other than that. I mean, we talked to the Gatekeeper folks, and that timeout didn't just stem from some Gatekeeper thing. It stemmed from like a cluster level default configuration for timeouts. So we're kind of hard constrained on that, since we want to have the experience based on the default Kubernetes deployment. So that's the approach that we've talked about right now. And we might be able to have the first pass of that preemptive caching sooner, but it will take a decent amount of effort to essentially build up that smart cache where, we go refetch things when we should, and we, check things periodically for new stuff. So that will be a mid to long term implementation, but
and
we might be able
also garbage collection, right?
Yes, yeah, because right now we have a file system based cache, so it goes and pulls stuff and stores it in a local ORAS cache on the container disk, and we don't invalidate that at all right now. So if you were to pull hundreds of thousands of manifests, you would eventually you'd probably blow up the Ratify container. So we'll have to address that, but we might be able to get better at least somewhat quickly, but long term, we're gonna have to put some work into that.
Sounds good. I know in the short term, we said we will return a different error to indicate that this failed due to the timeout issue. Have we already implemented that?
Yeah, so we currently have implemented that. So it'll tell you that, oh, we weren't able to make it in the 2.8 second timeout. What we would have to add is some sort of either to that message directly or like in the user guide saying that, hey, if you get this, you probably want to try 1 or 2 more times after. So.
I see. I'm just trying to think which user guide. Is it like in the README or something?
Yeah, probably in like the get started page, or I guess we can discuss kind of where that should go. But yeah.
If you are adding the walkthroughs for the pod identity, then maybe we can add it there as well.
Sounds good. Yep.
Yeah, that's everything on the agenda today. Does anyone else have any items today or next week? You can.
If we don't have time today, can we do PR 130? That's been open for quite some time.
Sorry, I didn't get that. PR at 1:30?
No, PR number 130.
Sure. Let me scroll up. Is it this one?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, Akash, you added some.
Yeah, I just added like 2 hours ago to kind of get this fixed. So I addressed all of Teja's comments. For some reason, the build is failing. I don't know why. It's working on my computer. So I'm just trying to fix that, but I think it should be pretty much ready to go after. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Sounds good.
That's great. Do we have any agenda items for next week?
No, I think I'll follow up with Shui on the Notary project side and figure out what we need to do, because when Eric is off, most likely you both will need support as well.
Okay, so Shui will be joining. Like, should I forward him an invite?
I don't know whether he'll be able to join, but we will probably have somebody from the Kubernetes side if we can. Let's see. I need to follow up. That's my action item.
Okay, sounds good. All right, thank you everyone for attending. I'll see you next week. Have a good week.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.